Good morning and welcome to this morning's live. Is there an issue in the aerospace supply chain? So welcome. Do come in this morning. We are streaming on LinkedIn Live, on YouTube, as well as Facebook. So what are we going to cover this morning? So the first is, am I even discussing this topic? What is it that has really triggered this conversation? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about my general thoughts on marketing in the aerospace industry and some observations that I've had over, say, the last 18 months. We're going to talk about some marketing recommendations that I have for aerospace leaders in the aerospace industry, whether you're CEOs, whether you're managing directors, whether you're business development directors, some really useful practical insights for you. And then we're going to have a live Q&A as well, where I answer any questions that you have. And then we're also going to talk about next steps. So if anything that I say triggers anything and you want to continue the conversation or find next steps, useful resources, then stay to the end. Now, before I go any further, do let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me okay in the chat. Want to make sure that you can see me and hear me okay before I continue this entire live. Okay, I believe you can. Let me know any thoughts, any comments you have, any feedback you have as we go along. I am looking at the chat as we go along, so I'll be able to see all your comments. And I do like these sessions to be quite interactive. So if you have any questions, have any thoughts, do not hesitate to let me know in the chat. And I will absolutely come back to you. So I'm just going to check. Excellent. Just checking that you can all hear me, which I believe you can. So first off, many of you that may be watching may not know who I am. So my name is Katrina Douglas. I am the founder of an organization called The Launch Strategist. Now, our business exists to help aerospace and aviation companies launch to their next level of growth. What I mean by that is we aim to strengthen the commercial capability and marketing effectiveness of aviation and aerospace companies so that they are more profitable, more scalable, and more resistant to market change. So let's get into this. So why, first things, why am I even having this conversation with you? And so the first thing is that I think in many ways, to those people outside of the industry, the industry is a hidden gem. So my background, let me just tell you how I even got into the industry, first of all. So I've been in marketing for 17 years, and 10 of those years I spent in corporate. At the peak of that, I was head of UK marketing for one of the biggest global domain registrars in the world. In 2015, I left, have been a marketing strategist, launched my own company, and then in 2016, 2019, I decided to really hone and focus on helping organizations launch to their next level of growth. Primarily, although people often think startup, although that was part of our work, it was about organizations that were actually very well established and wanted to launch to that next level of growth. And then something happened in 2021, and I got contacted by Cranfield University. And many of you know that Cranfield is a big institution for aviation and all the influence and work they're doing around that. And it was for organizations that wanted to scale up within aviation. I suddenly had this epiphany that for the first time in 17 years, I felt passionate about a sector to actually say, I'm going to close the door on everything else, every other sector, and just focus on the aviation and aerospace sector, because there is something very, very special here that the rest of society, business leaders like myself who are actually outside of the sector, know nothing about. And so that began a journey. And so over the last, I would say 18 months, I've spent this time really studying and assessing the industry, because it's one thing to know that there's opportunity in the space. There's another thing to know that there's a fit. And when I realized that there was a fit between what it is that my vision was for my organization and what it is that I felt that the aerospace needed in terms of commercial capability and marketing. So that's where we are, and that brings us today. And that brings us to why I'm actually studying this topic, because I look at your organization, your sector, this sector, or our sector, should I say. And in terms of engineering talent and in terms of technical capability, it is absolutely brilliant. And we are in the cusp of, as many of you know, in one of the most exciting times in aviation and aerospace history, with, everything that's happening in terms of net zero, advanced air mobility, even AI, CubeSats, and all of that good stuff is happening. And yet there is a whole sector of the business world that knows nothing about that. And I think that in some ways the industry has been quite closed, in the sense that you have a great community, which actually has been quite embracing for someone that has come from outside of the industry. But what that means is that but it also means that the industry is quite closed. And I think that's why we see, even in terms of young people understanding the career opportunities, in terms of it plays into the skills gap, it plays into the lack of diversity. And much of that, or some of that, should I say, because the issue is bigger than one thing, is that there is a lack of visibility. So those that would like to come into the industry, or would want to know more about it, or would want to even invest in the sector, don't know that the industry exists, because it is quite closed and it is quite tight-knit. And one thing I want to say is that, for me, this is not about criticism. This is about the fact that I think the industry is phenomenal. And I think that the world needs to see more of it. So I'm going to say some things that, could sound critical, but please know that they're not. They're from a place of, there is so much more that we could be doing from a commercial and marketing perspective. There is so much success aviation and aerospace companies could be having, but there's this missing commercial piece, because the focus, and rightly so, has been on engineering and the technical side of things and the safety, which is absolutely what it needs to be and needs to continue to be. But there's another piece of the puzzle, the commercial element, that there is a gap and there's a disconnect. So there is this disconnect that I've seen between this phenomenal engineering talent, between this pool of exceptionally talented people, and the awareness and the visibility of the sector. So I think also, when I look at the marketing collateral, when I look at what organizations are doing from a commercial and marketing perspective, there is a sense that it feels quite dated from a visual perspective, but also from a strategic perspective. And I think that in terms of marketing and its capability, there is more understanding to be had, shall I say, because when I look at what the industry does in terms of marketing, I guess it revolves around events, it revolves around industry bodies, and there's this great community and great network of connections. And then, yes, you do have websites, but they tend to be brochureware, in the sense that many don't have any real functionality in terms of helping to drive revenue, in terms of trying to position the company, in terms of reaching those corporate goals. They lack functionality. They're more brochureware, and if you go, you can tell what you will do, what the company does. But in terms of actually contributing to the bottom line, there is a disconnect. And so I see that there's networking and there's trade shows, and yes, there's websites, but the world of marketing strategically is so much broader than that. In terms of customer relationship management, it's such a relationship built on relationships, but then the process around that, the communication strategies around that, aren't always there. In terms of digital channels and maximizing channels like LinkedIn, and even having leveraging platforms like LinkedIn Live, and so many even opportunities, even if you look at LinkedIn, the marketing opportunities around that. And so when I look at what the industry is doing from a marketing and commercial perspective, and I look at what is possible, there again is this disconnect. And so there's this other thing that I've observed, in that many aerospace and aviation companies have been in the industry for decades. So there's very few new kids on the block, more so that we're seeing now in new space and space, but less so in aerospace. And so you come across a lot of aerospace companies. Most of you, I'm sure, your companies have been around for 30, 50, sometimes even more years. You're not new kids on the block. You've been doing this a very long time. And that lends itself to your expertise and so much the value that you have. You can lean so much in the positioning of the past and where the industry was 10, 30 years ago and what worked then and what was the thing to do, that now that we're looking at a landscape that looks quite different post-COVID, how do you reposition your organization and so it capitalizes on the past, moves into the future? Again, that's a marketing conundrum, that's a commercial conundrum, that's an important conversation that needs to be had. And so these are the things that have brought me to the point where actually there's some solutions to discuss, there's some discussions to discuss, there's some solutions to have, because I see much discussion around eVTOL and advanced air mobility and legislation and certification and all of those things that are very, very important. But hold on a minute. What are the commercial models that surround that? How are we gonna, talk to new stakeholders, new investors, the, public acceptance? How are those narratives? How are those conversations going to develop in an industry where you have new players coming up and there is a degree of friction between people that come in and think that they're going to get certification overnight, for example, and industry veterans were like, no, it doesn't work like that. But actually there's a moving together, there's an understanding, there's conversations, there's repositioning that needs to be had. But I'm not hearing these conversations and I'm not seeing these solutions. And I think it's time. And so again, that's what brings me here. Another significant observation, in fact, two observations. You can see that there is much I have to say. Two observations. The first is that there's a difference in marketing between tier ones, OEMs, and tier twos and tier threes. And so your Boeing, your Lockheed Martins, your Airbuses, they have their fingers more on the pulse in terms of marketing and the things that they do. They have their fingers on the pulse more, and that's understandable. You understand why that is, because it's easier. What they have to market is more tangible. If you're marketing airplanes and even engines, it's easier to market. They have massive budgets. They are almost the stars of the supply chain, and so you understand why there is this disconnect. And I also understand why tier twos and tier threes will probably be less inclined to market, because actually many of you are making components, you're kind of middlemen. Maybe you don't need to be as loud. You have government contracts, you only need a handful of contracts at a time. You're not an industry that needs 1 million clients. You already have tight relationships. So the question could be, okay, this is work, this is what we do, we don't need a ton of clients. It's the tier ones that need to be seen. We don't. But actually I think you do. I absolutely think you do. And so that's why I say, is there an issue? Is there an issue in the aerospace supply chain? Because not only as an industry as a whole are we seeing the lack of development of commercial models and marketing effectiveness, but there is a disconnect in the supply chain between who's marketing and how there's marketing. And even, I, over the last few months, have been to a few events. So at Farnborough Air Show last year, and a few events, industry events. And and that's one of your main marketing channels. I wasn't at Paris, but I know Paris recently happened. But what I know and what I've realized from going at that show is I don't think there was a single company that had a follow-up process in terms of at show and follow-up marketing that was fully connected, for example. And that's something that you will do. And that's what I say, when those things could be maximized more. And maybe the tier ones do that a little better, but I want to help strengthen the tier twos and the tier threes. I want to help the whole supply chain get better at this, because in answer to the question at the front, and in answer to the question that brought all of you here, there absolutely is a marketing issue in the supply chain. So we're just getting started. But do let me know if you have any thoughts, any comments. I'm watching from a platform called StreamYard. I don't see any comments there, but what I am going to do is just for a second look over on LinkedIn to make sure that I am not missing anything. Okay. Let's see what we have. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have both screens open so that I don't miss any comments that you have. Like I said, I want to make sure that if you have any questions for me, if you have any feedback, I can see them and I can answer those. Okay. So, oh, there was one more thing. That I wanted to say to you, which again, I love, but it's part of perhaps what the issue is. And that is the culture of humility that you have in the industry, which I love. It's so refreshing. And what I mean by the culture of humility is it's not cultural within the industry to shout about what you do. It's not cultural to shout about the successes that you have. It's not cultural. And what I mean by that is your priority is safety. And so the culture in the sector is caution. And rightly so, that culture around everything revolving around safety should never ever change. That culture around caution should never ever change. The issue is when it filters into the visibility of the industry, that hinders growth. The issue when it filters into the fact that actually, because in I guess in the space sector, for example, failure is normal. Rockets. You're working on some of the biggest challenges on the planet. And so you see a lot of failure as an industry. The space sector does anyway. And when you're working on those projects, when safety is such an important focus, there is that caution in the industry, which is beautiful and refreshing in so many ways. Coming from a background where tech was primarily my focus, and the entrepreneurial space where everybody's shouting. And I think for me, it's like you really are the change makers. Aerospace and what is happening in aviation aerospace right now and space, you are actually the change makers. You are some of the greatest minds on the planet. And so for me, it's just like, why does nobody know? Why does nobody know? And so yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And for those of you who are in this industry, applaud you for that, but also say actually that's also part of why I think there are marketing concerns as well. So okay, so let's talk about why. So 6 reasons why. I want to talk to you about 6 reasons why and the root of this, because I think it's always important to get to the root so we understand how to address the problem. And so the first thing is that a lot of aerospace companies, and absolutely correct me if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't quite agree with you, Katrina. I have an alternative view. Please, I'm fine with contrarian views, so let me know. But from what I've seen is, okay, I think that has come up. From what I've seen is a lot of aerospace and aviation organizations at the helm is engineers. You're led by engineers, which is phenomenal for obvious reasons. But also, if you are an engineer, you're more focused on the technical elements of the business. Yes, of course, you have commercial expertise, but the marketing side of things is obviously not going to be your main strength or your main strong suit, because you're an engineer. And so aerospace companies tend to be led by engineers who are, I guess, less commercial minded. Not to say that they're not commercially minded, but they're less. Whereas in other sectors of the business, of the business world, what you see is the leaders of tech firms tend to have a sales and marketing background, whereas leaders in the aerospace sector tend to have an engineering background, and that lends itself to the disconnect as well. The other thing is that the industry is relatively tight, and I said this previously. And so if you know everyone in the industry, if you know that client and you can just pick up the phone or see them at the next event, then again, why would you necessarily want to invest in marketing? So I understand that. Many of you might be thinking, well, I don't really think we have an issue. Our company's done so well, all right. We're members of industry bodies. we're doing all right. Why would we need to change things? And ultimately, old ways don't work in new seasons. And so I don't want the aerospace industry, like so many other industries, where you see these juggernauts and they were number one and massive players in their industries. And then 5, 10 years down the line, you wonder, where did they go? And the reason is they didn't evolve. They didn't evolve. And so it doesn't matter how great you are or great you have been, there is this need for future focus as well. Again, if budgets are limited, I understand why organizations would want to invest in more in science and technology as opposed to marketing. And marketing doesn't have, one thing I do want to say, marketing doesn't have to be astronomical. You can market effectively practically on any budget, to be fair. So don't let your thoughts around how much marketing costs stop you from trying to find a solution to these industries, because it doesn't have to be an either or, it should be an and, is what I'm saying. And I think there is this understanding that there's a lack of understanding around marketing as well. Why should we? And one thing that I've noticed is that many organizations have business development directors, but you don't have marketing functions. And I understand that business development has marketing remit and does maybe do some marketing activity, but it's not the same. And ideally, at a certain stage of your business, you do need to invest in both. Just having a business development director isn't enough, for all the reasons that I've spoken about. For you to really capitalize on marketing, there absolutely does need specific focus. And so just very briefly, and I put a post out on this on LinkedIn, and many of you may have seen it, the 6 reasons why not investing enough in marketing is problematic. The first one is it makes you over reliant on your existing clients. You should always, especially in an industry where you don't need a lot of clients, when you're not marketing, when you're not raising your visibility and people don't know who your organization is, you are over reliant, and it's a potential problem. It may be a potential problem down the line. Number 2 is that it lowers the return on investment of existing channels. For example, many of you may have invested a lot in the Farnborough Air Show, going to the Paris Air Show, but actually, when there isn't a particular plan around those events, it lowers your return on investment. So my questions to many of you that attended would be, okay, what did you do pre-show? What was your pre-show comms activity? What was your at-show comms activity? Even if you didn't exhibit, what was the plan of communication when you went there, other than to have meetings and have conversations with a few key people? What else was around it? When you got home, what was your post-marketing activity? What was done to capitalize on those relationships and make sure those relationships keep happening? What happens is if the person that went to the show leaves? Does that mean that the capital that you brought up at the event now leaves with that business development person? How are you safeguarding the value of those investments? How are you doing that? With your website, you may have invested 10,000. Websites aren't cheap. Well, they can be, but in the most cases, they're not. So how are you getting a return on investment? How are you capturing leads on those websites? What stage of the buying cycle are they helpful for people? What levels of communication do you have? Or is it just about what you manufacture and how you manufacture it? So when you don't have marketing and a solid marketing strategy, you're not getting that level of return from those existing marketing investments. It also lowers customer lifetime value. And so you may have a client and you may have had that client for years, but if you're not constantly educating that client on the value that you have, improvements in your business, improvements in your processes, how you can continue to help them, and you're not adding value to that relationship over time, as the industry gets more competitive, it's easier for those existing clients that you may have had for years to be like, actually, I see this company over here and they seem to be able to offer me more value. Yes, we've had this relationship for years and we've been loyal for years, but what is it? And I know there are barriers to entry, absolutely. So the good thing is that it's not as easy to enter aerospace as it is for other sectors, but there is still that need to make sure that you are getting as much customer lifetime value, or that value as much as possible, because it takes a while to get a client in aerospace. It does. And so it's important that you're safeguarding that. Missed opportunities. There are new entrants coming into the market. There are investors coming into the market, with new space. Although there is a way to go, the industry is getting more visible. So how do new entrants to the market, know about you? How do you make sure that, as people in the industry move on, retire, how do you make sure that you're not losing all of those relationships when they leave? These are all the reasons why marketing is important. It's not just about fluff. It's not just about pretty pictures. It's not about, there's a tangible connection between the growth of your organization and your marketing and commercial strategy. And so those are some of the issues and some of the reasons why. And so before we go into questions and answers, I would just like to give you a couple of recommendations. And so I gave you one around websites. I would say really take the time to review your website and think about not how it could necessarily just look better, because we always want great looking websites. And yes, when I look at the websites in the aviation aerospace industry, they do tend to look a little bit more dated, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that they do a job. And there's so much your website could be doing for you, even in terms of, are you tracking data? Are you tracking through platforms like Google Analytics? So you're seeing who's visiting your website. How many visitors do you have? Are you capturing their information when they visit? Is it growing or is it declining? What content is bringing people to your website? Who do you want your website to really speak to? Is it really telling people just about what you do and about who you are? Is it really speaking to those clients? Is it all of those questions? But just look at your website, not from the lens of the company, but from your ideal client, and ask yourself, if I were a client of our company, how much value would I get from visiting this site, other than contact information and other than just information on what you do? How could you improve the usability of that website? Again, I gave you the point about trade show marketing. Think about the 3 stages of marketing and make sure that you don't have holes where you're losing opportunities because there isn't a proper customer relationship management process. So what are you doing before, during, and after those events? In terms of the industry bodies that you're connected to, how can you get increased value from your membership? And look beyond traditional marketing channels. I get that you've done events for years. I get that, there's a standard way of doing things, but things like email marketing, things like LinkedIn marketing, things like search engine optimization, things like content marketing, where you're just adding value. YouTube is the number 2 search engine on the planet. There's so much you could be doing beyond the standard channels. And I just invite you to have an open mind towards marketing and what it could add to your business, because not just for your organization, but for the good of the whole industry. I think one of the things that is quite frustrating for someone that doesn't come from the industry. I come into the industry, and in fact, prior to the industry, I'm quite well, I would say probably quite well connected in the business spaces that I was in, and no one knew about aerospace. I come into the aerospace and aviation sector, and it's a great sector, but there's very few people that look like me. I look at young people. I have almost 20-year-old, and a 15-year-old, and I look at their career paths, and at no point were they really aware of industries that they could have pursued in the aerospace and aviation industry. And I look at your skills shortage, and I think, my goodness, how different could things be if there was a slightly different thinking in this area? And these are all pressing issues that need to be addressed. So for those that you are watching live, thank you so much. I'm still taking questions. And wanting to see any feedback that you have. But for those that are joining live or catching the replay, I hope you have found this valuable so far. Please do stay connected to me. In fact, if you want to, I always keep a few slots in my calendar open for conversations. Um, and so feel free to book one of those in the calendar. I will post that link in the comments. If you'd like to have a 15-minute conversation, feel free to do so. Absolutely, Marvin Samuels. Schools, carers, advisors need to promote more roles in the sector more. Absolutely. So they absolutely do need to promote roles in the sector more. What I will do as well, bear with me a second. I'm just going to pop over to LinkedIn. Like I said, to make sure that I'm not missing you. Okay. Excellent. We absolutely do need to promote roles in the sector more. Another thing that I want to tell you all about is that there is if you want more practical marketing advice and tips, you can go ahead and join our next webinar taking place on the 28th of September. So you can do that. I have posted that in the chat as well. So let me just check that you can see that. What I'll do is I'll post that over here in LinkedIn as well. And if you'd like to book an appointment, I'll also post that in LinkedIn as well. So I don't see any other questions and I don't see any other feedback. So thank you all for joining me this morning. Let me just post this other link in case that you do, those of you watching on LinkedIn do want to join. Thank you for joining me live. I always enjoy coming live. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions that you didn't want to pose or any feedback that you didn't want to pose in this actual live discussion, feel free to contact me, feel free to reach out. And whether or not you're watching the replay or whether you're watching live, thank you so much for joining. I will be doing these lives more often and I hope to engage with you again in the future. So have an amazing weekend and the rest of the week and take care. Bye-bye.